In February 1999, India and Pakistan signed the Lahore Declaration. Two nuclear neighbors promising restraint, dialogue, and confidence building after decades of tension over Kashmir. Just months later, Pakistani troops quietly crossed the line of control, occupied mountain peaks in the Kargil sector, and brought the region to the brink of another war. This is the story of how a democracy responded to a reckless gamble by its neighbor's deep state, and why Kargil still matters for global security today. I am Jet Royce, and you are watching The Grid. Lahore wasn't just symbolism. The declaration explicitly committed both sides to intensify efforts for peace, respect each other's territorial integrity, and work on nuclear risk reduction measures. Yet, even as India's Prime Minister crossed the border by bus, Pakistan's Northern Light Infantry and associated formations were preparing a covert operation, seizing high-altitude positions overlooking India's vital Srinagar-Leh highway in Kargil. Pakistani officials initially described the fighters as Mujahideen. Later accounts, including statements by Pakistan's own army chief, General Asim Munir, have acknowledged the operation as a direct military intervention. The Kargil War, fought between May and July 1999, unfolded at altitudes above 16,000 feet in one of the world's harshest battlefields. Pakistani forces established well-fortified bunkers on peaks like Tolaling and Tiger Hill, aiming to bring India's main supply route to Siachen within their firing arcs. Indian troops launched repeated uphill assaults under artillery and small arms fire. Battles for Tolaling and Tiger Hill became turning points as Indian units, notably 18 grenadiers and 2 Rajputana rifles, eventually recaptured these positions at enormous human cost. By 26 July, India had pushed back the intruders, restored control over its territory, and declared Operation Vijay a success, a victory still commemorated annually as Kargil Vijay Divas. Kargil exposed a deep structural problem in Pakistan: the disconnect between elected civilian leaders and a powerful, often autonomous military establishment. Academic studies of the conflict describe it as a case of civil-military split. Key elements of the Pakistan Army planned and executed the operation, while the civilian government was either not fully informed or not in control of the decision. Former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif later testified that his clash with Army Chief Parvez Musharraf over Kargil contributed directly to the October 1999 military coup that ousted his government. In other words, the same gamble that failed on the battlefield also destabilized Pakistan's democracy at home, reinforcing a pattern where security policy is driven by generals rather than elected representatives. India's response was shaped by two constraints: domestic democratic oversight and the reality that both states were now nuclear armed. New Delhi chose a limited war strategy, using air power, artillery, and infantry to recapture occupied heights, but avoiding crossing the international border or expanding the conflict beyond the Kargil sector. Operational decisions were taken under civilian authority, with the Cabinet Committee on Security and Parliament actively engaged. India also leveraged diplomacy, including high-level talks in Washington, to build international support for de-escalation and withdrawal. For global observers, Kargil became an example of how democratic institutions can restrain military action even under severe provocation, limiting a war that might otherwise have spiraled into a larger, possibly nuclear, confrontation. One of the most revealing decisions after the war was Pakistan's treatment of the Northern Light Infantry, the formation that had spearheaded the Kargil operation. Despite suffering heavy casualties and failing to secure lasting gains, the NLI was upgraded after Kargil from a paramilitary-style formation to a full infantry regiment of the Pakistan Army, bringing its soldiers under the same pay and benefits as regular troops. The move can be read as narrative management, rewarding loyalty, integrating frontier units more tightly into the army, and framing a failed operation as a heroic struggle rather than a strategic miscalculation. Kargil didn't just expose how Pakistan's military planned the war. It also revealed how far the establishment was willing to go to preserve deniability, even at the cost of its own soldiers. Indian troops recovered hundreds of bodies belonging to Pakistan's Northern Light Infantry and other units on the Kargil Heights, with identification documents and tags clearly showing they were regular soldiers. Yet Islamabad initially refused to accept most of these remains, insisting the intruders were mujahideen, or irregular fighters. Only a handful of bodies were taken back. The rest were disowned to avoid admitting the army's role in the operation. Faced with this refusal, Indian units arranged Islamic last rites and buried many of the Pakistani dead with full military honors in the mountains where they fell. A professional gesture recorded in official accounts and later reporting. The case of Captain Colonel Sher Khan is particularly striking. Pakistan initially denied he was an army officer, even when India provided evidence of his identity. Indian commanders, impressed by his courage at Tiger Hill, wrote a citation and returned his body with respect, which eventually forced Pakistan to recognize him and award its highest military honor, the Nishan-e-Haider. For many other NLI soldiers, however, there were no public funerals, no acknowledgement, and no closure for families. Their own state chose narrative management over military ethics. The contrast is stark. One army quietly honors even its adversaries dead, according to faith and tradition. The other hides behind deniability and abandons men it sent into battle. The legacy of these choices is visible today in the contrasting trajectories of Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, POK. J&K has seen large investments in roads, tunnels, rail connectivity and bridges, expanded tourism, and better access to healthcare and education, particularly in the years following deeper constitutional integration with India. POK, by contrast, continues to grapple with limited infrastructure, constrained political autonomy, and recurring protests over issues like electricity tariffs and resource exploitation, where local communities feel treated as second-class citizens. It's a stark illustration of how governance models and civil-military balances shape everyday life in disputed mountain regions. Kargil is often remembered for daring night assaults and iconic battles on frozen cliffs. But its deeper lesson is about institutions. When militaries operate without meaningful civilian oversight, they can drag entire societies into dangerous gambles, with long-term costs for democracy, development, and regional stability. When democracies hold their militaries accountable, wars can be limited, diplomacy can still matter, and security policy is more likely to reflect the interests of citizens rather than the ambitions of generals. 25 years on, Kargil remains a case study not just in high-altitude warfare, but in how nuclear-armed states manage, or fail to manage, the power of their own deep states.